The blood trail in the snow led Yates Keller straight to what he thought would be a corpse, but the shallow breathing told him he had minutes, maybe seconds, to change fate. He dropped from his horse without bothering to tie the reins, his boots crunching through the crystalline surface as he ran toward the crumpled figure, half buried in a drift beside a frozen creek. The winter of 1878 had been merciless across Utah Territory, and this woman looked like she had been fighting it for days. Her lips were blue, her skin pale as the snow surrounding her, and when Yates carefully turned her over, he saw the wound. A bullet had torn through her shoulder, the fabric of her dress stiff with frozen blood. But what made his jaw clench with anger was the second set of tracks leading away from the spot. Boot prints that told a story he had seen too many times in his 32 years. Someone had left her here to die. Yates worked fast, stripping off his heavy coat and wrapping it around her slight frame. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with dark hair matted against her forehead, and features that would have been beautiful if they were not slack with approaching death. He lifted her as gently as he could, feeling how light she was, how the cold had already begun claiming her his horse. A steady buckskin named Jasper stood patient as Yates mounted with the woman cradled against his chest. The cabin he had been heading toward was still 2 miles north, but he pushed Jasper into a careful lope, knowing that every minute counted. The December sun was already sliding toward the western peaks of the Wasatch Range, and the temperature would drop 20 degrees once darkness fell. The cabin appeared through the pine trees like a blessing. Smoke still rose from the chimney where Yates had banked the fire that morning before heading out to check his trap lines. He had been living here alone for 3 winters now, preferring the solitude of the mountains to the growing bustle of Ogden 15 miles southwest. The town had exploded since the Transcontinental Railroad came through in 1869, bringing civilization that Yates had spent most of his adult life avoiding. Inside, the cabin was warm enough that frost did not coat the windows. Yates laid the woman on his bed, the only bed, and immediately set about building up the fire. Then he heated water and gathered the medical supplies he kept in a wooden box under the washstand. Living alone in the wilderness meant knowing how to treat injuries, and he had sewn up his share of wounds over the years. Cutting away the frozen fabric of her dress revealed the full extent of the damage. The bullet had passed clean through, which was fortunate, but the wound was at least 2 days old and showed signs of infection despite the cold. Yates cleaned it as thoroughly as he could, applied a poultice of herbs his mother had taught him to make, and bandaged it with strips of clean cloth. Then he covered her with every blanket he owned and tried to warm her hands and feet, watching for signs of frostbite. She did not wake that first night. Yates sat beside the bed in his only chair, feeding the fire and checking her breathing every few minutes. He made broth from dried venison and managed to get a few spoonfuls past her lips, though most of it dribbled down her chin. Her fever climbed as the infection fought against her weakened body, and more than once he thought he would lose her before dawn. But she was stronger than she looked. When the pale winter sun finally crept through the window, her breathing had steadied and the flush of fever had faded slightly. Yates allowed himself to doze in the chair, exhausted from the vigil. He woke to find her eyes open, watching him. They were brown, he noticed, the color of good earth, and currently filled with confusion and fear. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. "You are safe here. My name is Yates Keller. I found you in the snow yesterday." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. He brought her water, supporting her head while she drank. She winced at the movement, her hand instinctively going to her bandaged shoulder. "You were shot," Yates explained. "The wound is infected, but I have been treating it. You have been unconscious for nearly 24 hours. This time when she spoke, the words were barely a whisper. "How did you find me?" "Followed your blood trail from about a mile east. You must have been walking for some time before you collapsed." Her eyes closed and he saw tears squeeze from beneath the lids. Whatever had happened to her, the memory brought pain that had nothing to do with the bullet wound. "Do you have a name?" he asked gently, a long pause. Then, "Zara Wallace. Miss Wallace, can you tell me who shot you?" Her whole body tensed, and for a moment he thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was hollow. "My brothers, Owen and James Wallace." Yates felt anger surge through him again, the same rage he had felt when he first saw those boot prints walking away from her dying body. "Your own brothers did this to you. They found out I was planning to leave, to go to California." Zara opened her eyes again, staring at the rough wooden beams of the ceiling. "We had a ranch, small place about 10 miles from here. Our parents died last year, cholera, and my brothers inherited everything. They told me I could stay as long as I worked, but I had no say in anything, no money of my own. I was just free labor to them." She paused, breathing carefully. "I started hiding what I could. A few coins here and there, anything I could sell. It took me 8 months to save enough for a train ticket and a little money to start over. I was going to leave in the spring, but Owen found my hiding place. They were so angry." "Angry enough to kill you," Yates said, the words bitter in his mouth. "James said I was stealing from them, that everything I had earned belonged to the ranch, belonged to them as the men of the family. They took me out riding, said we needed to check on some cattle in the high pastures." Her voice broke. "Owen shot me. I fell off my horse, and when I looked up, they were both just staring down at me. James said the cold would make it quick, that it was kinder than I deserved. Then they rode away." Yates had to stand and walk to the window, his fists clenched. He had seen cruelty in his years, had witnessed the worst that men could do to each other. But something about this particular betrayal, brothers abandoning their own sister to freeze to death, made him want to ride down the mountain and find Owen and James Wallace right now. "How did you survive?" he asked, forcing himself to stay calm. "I do not know. I managed to get up, started walking. I thought if I could reach Ogden, find help." She laughed weakly. "I did not make it very far. You made it far enough, any less and I would not have found you in time." Over the next week, Yates tended to Zara with the same careful attention he would give a wounded animal he hoped to see run free again. He changed her bandages twice daily, made her eat even when she had no appetite, and helped her sit up for longer periods each day as her strength slowly returned. The infection retreated under his ministrations, and color began returning to her pale cheeks. They talked during those long winter days. Yates told her about growing up in Missouri, about fighting in the war when he was barely 18, about drifting west afterward because he could not find peace in the settled places. He told her about his parents, both gone now, and his sister Margaret, who had married a shopkeeper in St. Louis, and sent him letters he rarely answered. Zara spoke of her childhood on the ranch, of a father who had been kind but distant, and a mother who taught her to read despite her brothers claiming it was a waste of time for a girl. She described the slow suffocation she had felt after her parents died, watching her brothers become harder and more controlling, realizing that her future had become a cage. "I wanted to see the ocean," she said one afternoon, gazing out the window at the snow-laden pines. "I have never seen anything bigger than Bear Lake. California seemed like a dream, this place where I could be whoever I wanted to be." "It is not too late," Yates said. "Once you are healed, once the spring comes, you can still go." She looked at him then with an expression he could not quite read. "Maybe," was all she said. By the third week, Zara was strong enough to walk around the cabin, though her shoulders still pained her and would for months to come. Yates had moved to sleeping on the floor near the fire, insisting she needed the bed to recover properly. The arrangement felt natural now, this strange domestic situation that had developed out of desperation. Yates found himself watching her more than he should. The way she moved around his small kitchen, making coffee with the supplies he brought in from the cache outside. The way she braided her long, dark hair each morning, her fingers quick and practiced. The sound of her rare laughter when he told a story about a particularly stubborn mule he had owned years ago. He was falling in love with her, he realized. It was a quiet, sneaking sort of love, the kind that grew in the spaces between words and in the comfortable silences they shared. He had not felt this way about anyone since before the war, when he had been young and the world had still seemed full of possibility. But Zara was healing now, growing stronger each day. Soon she would be well enough to leave, and he would have to let her go. The thought sat heavy in his chest like a stone. One evening in early January, they sat by the fire after supper. The wind howled outside, another storm moving through, but inside the cabin was warm and bright. Zara had been unusually quiet all day, and Yates could tell something was on her mind. "What will you do?" she asked finally. "When winter ends, same thing I always do, check my trap lines, hunt, maybe take some pelts down to Ogden to trade." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Why do you ask?" "I have been thinking about my brothers, about what they did." Her voice was steady, but he heard the emotion beneath it. "They probably think I am dead. They will have told people I went to California, or that I ran off with some man, anything to explain why I am gone." "Probably," Yates agreed carefully. "I could go back to Ogden. Tell the marshal what happened." She shook her head. "But who would believe me? Two respected ranchers against their sister who everyone knows was rebellious and difficult. They would say I was lying, trying to steal from them. Justice is not always easy to find," Yates said. "Especially not for women." Zara turned to look at him directly. "I have another idea. I could stay dead. They think I am dead, so let them keep thinking it. I could start over, but not in California. Here." Yates felt his heart stutter. "Here, not in Ogden," she clarified quickly. "But somewhere in the territory. Somewhere far enough from my brothers that I would never see them again. I could get work, find a way to support myself. I could be free, truly free, for the first time in my life." He wanted to offer her everything in that moment. Wanted to tell her she could stay right here in this cabin, that he would take care of her, that he had fallen completely and hopelessly in love with her. But the words stuck in his throat. She was talking about freedom, and he would not trap her again after everything she had been through. "You could do that," he said instead. "There are towns north of here, small places where no one knows you. You could make up a new history, a new name even." "I like my name," Zara said softly. "I just want to be able to live my life on my own terms." The storm lasted 3 days. During that time, trapped inside together, something shifted between them. Yates would catch Zara looking at him when she thought he was occupied with some task. She started sitting closer to him by the fire, their shoulders nearly touching. Once, reaching for the same piece of firewood, their hands brushed and neither pulled away immediately. On the third night, when the wind finally died down, Zara spoke into the darkness. Yates was lying by the fire as usual, and he had thought she was asleep. "Yates?" "Yes." "Why did you save me?" He considered the question. "Because I could. Because leaving someone to die when you can help is not something I am capable of doing. Even though I was a stranger. Even though it has been nothing but trouble for you taking care of me." "You have not been trouble," he said honestly. "You have been the best company I have had in years." A long silence. Then he heard her move, the rustle of blankets. "I do not want to go to California anymore." Yates sat up, trying to see her face in the dim glow from the fire. "What do you want?" "I want to stay here. With you." If you will have me, his breath caught. Zara, you do not have to offer yourself to me out of gratitude. I saved your life because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected anything in return. That is not why. She was sitting up now, too, and in the firelight he could see her eyes shining. I am offering because somewhere in these weeks, I have fallen in love with you. I have fallen in love with your kindness and your strength, and the way you never once made me feel like a burden. I have fallen in love with your stories and your patience, and the way you look at me like I matter. Yates crossed the small space between them in a heartbeat. He knelt beside the bed, taking her hands in his. I have been in love with you since the second week you were here, maybe earlier. I did not say anything because I thought you deserved better than a mountain hermit living in a one-room cabin. This cabin saved my life. You saved my life. Zara brought his hand to her cheek. I do not want grand houses or fine things. I want a life that is mine to live with someone who sees me as an equal partner. Can you give me that? I can give you that and more, Yates promised. But it will not be easy. Winters are hard up here. The work is constant. We would have to make trips to town for supplies, and there is always the chance someone might recognize you. Then we will deal with those challenges together, Zara said firmly. I am not afraid of hard work, and as for my brothers, they made their choice when they left me for dead. I have made my peace with being Zara Wallace who died in the snow. Now I want to be Zara Keller who lives in these mountains. He kissed her then, gentle and careful of her still healing shoulder. She kissed him back with a fierceness that told him she had meant every word. This woman who had survived betrayal and bullets and the killing cold, she was choosing him, choosing this life, and Yates felt blessed beyond measure. They were married in late January by a traveling preacher who sometimes made rounds through the isolated mountain cabins. The man asked no questions about where Zara had come from or why they had no family present. He blessed their union, accepted the venison Yates offered in trade, and went on his way. The rest of that winter passed in a kind of golden haze. Yates taught Zara to shoot, to track, to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals. She proved to be a quick study and fearless in her willingness to try new things. She took over the cooking, transforming his simple camp meals into actual cuisine using wild herbs and creativity. She mended his clothes, organized his chaotic collection of tools and supplies, and made the cabin feel like a home instead of just a shelter. And in the quiet hours, they learned each other. Yates discovered that Zara loved to sing old hymns while she worked, that she was ticklish behind her left ear, that she slept curled on her right side to keep pressure off her wounded shoulder. Zara learned that Yates had nightmares sometimes about the war, that he was afraid of thunderstorms though he tried to hide it, that his gruff exterior hid a deeply romantic soul. They made love for the first time on a night in February when snow was falling softly outside and the cabin was warm with firelight. Yates was endlessly gentle, conscious of her shoulder, wanting to give her nothing but pleasure after all the pain she had endured. Zara met him with equal tenderness, her hands exploring his scarred chest and back, her lips finding all the places that made him gasp. Afterward, holding her close, Yates thought he had never been happier in his entire life. Spring came late to the mountains that year, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow retreated up the slopes, revealing meadows full of wildflowers. The frozen creek became a rushing stream. Elk and deer emerged from their winter refuges, and the forest rang with birdsong. Yates and Zara settled into the rhythms of mountain life. They planted a small garden near the cabin, coaxing vegetables from the thin soil. They fished in the creek and hunted when they needed meat. Yates checked his trap lines less frequently now, finding he did not need the income as much as he had thought. He had Zara, and she was worth more than all the pelts he could ever sell. In May, they made their first trip to Ogden together. Zara wore a bonnet that shadowed her face and kept close to Yates while he traded furs and bought supplies. No one gave her a second glance. She was just another mountain wife, unremarkable among the bustling crowds that now filled the railroad town. They were loading their purchases into the wagon when Yates heard a voice that made Zara freeze beside him. "Yates Keller, that really you?" Yates turned to see a man he vaguely recognized from years past, someone he had played cards with once or twice. "Afraid so. Heard you were still up in the high country, stubborn as ever." The man laughed, then his eyes slid to Zara with curiosity. "Got yourself hitched, did you?" "This is my wife," Yates said simply, his hand finding the small of Zara's back in a protective gesture. "Well, congratulations. Say, did you hear about that Wallace situation? Owen and James Wallace lost their sister last winter. Girl ran off and froze to death apparently. They found her body just last week, been under the snow all this time. Terrible tragedy." Yates felt Zara stiffen under his hand. He kept his expression neutral. "That's so. Yeah, they had a funeral and everything. Whole town turned out. Those brothers were torn up about it, saying they wished they had treated her better." The man shook his head. "Funny thing though, some folks saying the body was too decomposed to really identify. Could have been anyone, but I guess her brothers would know their own sister." "I guess they would," Yates agreed. "We should be heading back. Long ride ahead." They left town quickly after that, not speaking until they were well into the foothills. Finally, Zara said, "They found a body. Sounds like it. Some poor soul who died in the winter and had the misfortune of being about your size." Yates kept his eyes on the trail. "Your brothers took advantage of it to close the book on their guilty consciences." "You think they really feel guilty?" "I think they realized that murdering their sister was not something they could live with easily. Finding a body gave them permission to play the role of grieving brothers. They probably even believe their own lies by now." Zara was quiet for a long moment. "So I really am dead now, officially." "Does that bother you?" "No," she said slowly. "It is strange, but it feels like freedom, complete freedom. Zara Wallace is dead and buried. I am Zara Keller, and that is exactly who I want to be." Summer arrived in full glory, painting the high meadows with color and warmth. Yates and Zara spent long days outside, working the garden, improving the cabin, exploring the vast wilderness that was now their shared home. They found a grove of wild raspberry bushes and spent an entire afternoon picking fruit, eating as much as they saved, juice staining their fingers purple. One evening in July, sitting outside the cabin watching the stars emerge, Zara told Yates she was pregnant. He was speechless for a moment, then he laughed and picked her up carefully, spinning her around while she protested and giggled. They had not been trying particularly, but they had not been preventing it either, and the news filled Yates with a joy he had not known he was capable of feeling. "A baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "I hope you are ready for even less sleep than you get now," Zara teased, but her eyes were bright with happiness. They spent the rest of the summer preparing. Yates built a cradle from smooth pine, working on it every evening by lamplight. Zara sewed tiny clothes from soft cloth she had bought in Ogden, her hands gentle on the small garments. They talked about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the life they would give this child who would grow up in the wilderness. The baby came in March of 1879, arriving with the last winter storm. Yates played midwife with the help of a native woman named Mary who lived in a cabin a few miles north and who had delivered half the babies in the high country. It was the longest night of Yates's life, watching Zara labor, feeling helpless and terrified. But when dawn broke and he heard his son's first cry, he felt his entire world shift and resettle around this new tiny person. They named him Thomas, after Yates's father. He had dark hair like his mother and blue eyes that Yates insisted would turn brown like Zara's eventually. He was healthy and loud and perfect in every way. Fatherhood changed Yates in ways he had not anticipated. He became even more protective of their small family, even more determined to make their mountain home safe and comfortable. He built an addition onto the cabin, creating a second room so Thomas would have space of his own as he grew. He put in real glass windows, bought from Ogden at considerable expense, because he wanted his son to see the mountain sunlight streaming in. Zara bloomed in motherhood. She sang to Thomas constantly, old songs and new ones she made up. She was patient with his tears and generous with her laughter. She taught him to walk in the meadow behind the cabin, holding his small hands as he toddled through the wildflowers. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Sarah after Zara's mother. She was smaller than Thomas had been, more delicate, with light brown hair and Yates's blue eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help to hold her, to show her his treasures of interesting rocks and pine cones. The years flowed by like the creek beside their cabin, constant and full of life. Thomas grew tall and serious, learning to hunt and track beside his father. Sarah was wilder, more adventurous, climbing trees and catching frogs with fearless enthusiasm. A third child arrived when Thomas was 5, and Sarah was 3, another boy they named Daniel. He was the quietest of the 3, content to sit and watch birds for hours, noticing things his siblings missed. They became a family known to others in the high country. The hermit Yates Keller, who had married the mysterious woman nobody quite knew the origins of, and their growing brood of mountain children. They were respected, liked even, for their willingness to help neighbors and their skill at surviving in the harsh conditions. Occasionally, Yates and Zara would take the wagon to Ogden for supplies, leaving the children with Mary. They never stayed long, and Zara always kept her bonnet low. But as the years passed, the likelihood of anyone recognizing her grew smaller and smaller. The Wallace brothers had long since sold their ranch and moved to Montana, or so the gossip said. They had left behind the memories of their parents and their dead sister, starting fresh somewhere they did not have to remember what they had done. Zara did not waste time thinking about them. Her life was too full of good things to dwell on the past. She had Yates, who still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She had 3 healthy children who were growing up wild and free and happy. She had a home that was truly hers, built by her own hands and her husband's labor, filled with love and laughter. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised her with a gift he had been working on in secret. It was a painting, small and inexpertly done, but recognizable as the view from their cabin at sunset, the mountains purple in the distance and the meadow gold with evening light. "I did not know you could paint," Zara said, touched beyond words. "I cannot, not really. But I wanted to try to capture what I see every time I look at our life here, what you gave me when you agreed to stay." Yates wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I spent so many years just surviving, just getting through one day to the next. You taught me how to live." Zara turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. He was 42 now, his dark hair shot through with silver, lines around his eyes from years of squinting at the mountain sun. He was the most handsome man she had ever seen. "You saved my life," she said simply. "And then you gave me a life worth saving." They kissed in the fading light while inside the cabin their children argued good-naturedly about whose turn it was to set the table. This was happiness, Zara thought. This ordinary, extraordinary life they had built together from blood and snow and stubborn determination. The years continued their steady march. Thomas reached 18 and decided he wanted to try his hand at working on the railroad, though he promised to visit often. Sarah, at 16, was courting a young rancher's son who looked at her with the same awestruck devotion Yates had once shown Zara. Daniel, at 13, announced he wanted to be a botanist, though they had to explain what that actually meant and how one became such a thing. Yates and Zara watched their children begin forging their own paths with a mixture of pride and sadness. They had known this day would come, but it did not make it easier to see their babies becoming adults with dreams that would take them beyond the mountain cabin. "We did well," Zara said one evening after Thomas had left for his new job in Ogden. "They are good people, all three of them." "They are," Yates agreed. "They are like their mother." "And their father," Zara insisted. "They have your steadiness, your strength." They were 51 and 43 respectively now, firmly into middle age. Yates's back ached on cold mornings and Zara's shoulder still pained her when storms came through. But they were healthy, happy, and still deeply in love. Sarah married her rancher's son in the summer of 1891, a joyful celebration held in the meadow behind the cabin. Thomas came home for the wedding, bringing with him a sweet-faced girl he was courting. Daniel gave his sister away, solemn and proud in his best clothes. Zara cried during the ceremony, though she tried to hide it. These were happy tears, she told Yates, tears of gratitude for a life she had never imagined possible. She thought about the girl she had been, freezing in the snow, betrayed and abandoned. She thought about how close she had come to never knowing any of this, never loving Yates, never holding her babies, never seeing Sarah radiant in her wedding dress. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, catching her expression. "That I would do it all again," Zara said. "Every hard thing, every painful moment, if I knew it would lead me here to you." The celebration lasted late into the night. There was music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Neighbors from miles around had come, bearing gifts and good wishes. Yates danced with Zara under the stars, moving slowly to the fiddle music, and remembered the first time he had held her, how light she had felt in his arms, how fragile. She was not fragile now. She was strong, resilient, a force of nature in her own right. When the last guests had left and Sarah and her new husband had ridden off to start their life together, Yates and Zara sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun rise over the mountains. 21 years, Zara said softly, since that winter. 21 years, Yates echoed. Best years of my life. Mine too. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light paint the peaks gold and pink. Somewhere a bird called. The creek rushed its endless song. Inside the cabin, Daniel was still sleeping, but he would wake soon and the day would begin with all its ordinary tasks and small joys. This was the life they had built from nothing, from desperation and chance and a blood trail in the snow, from kindness offered without expectation of return, from love that had grown slowly, carefully, rooting itself deep. Thomas ended up managing a hotel in Ogden, marrying his sweetheart and giving Yates and Zara their first grandchildren, twin boys who visited the mountain cabin every summer and thought their grandparents were the most interesting people in the world. Sarah had 3 daughters in quick succession, each one more spirited than the last. Daniel went east to study plants, sending letters full of Latin names and detailed sketches of specimens he found fascinating. As Yates and Zara grew older, they spent more time in Ogden during the winters, finding the mountain cold harder to bear with aging bones. They bought a small house near Thomas's hotel, simple but comfortable. But every spring they returned to the cabin, to the place where their love story had truly begun. On a summer evening in 1898, sitting on their porch with grandchildren playing in the meadow, Zara said, "I want you to know something." Yates looked over at her. She was 63 now, her dark hair completely silver, her face lined with decades of laughter and hard work. She was more beautiful to him than she had been at 23. "What is that?" "I have never regretted it. Not once, not for a single moment. Choosing you, choosing this life. I know I have said it before, but I want you to know it is still true. Will always be true." Yates reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I found you dying in the snow and thought I was just saving a life. I did not know I was finding my entire future." "We saved each other," Zara said. "You gave me breath and warmth and medicine. I gave you a reason to come down from this mountain and remember how to be part of the world." They watched their grandchildren play, their children's children, bright and healthy and full of promise. The sun set in its familiar glory, painting everything gold. Inside the cabin, dinner was waiting. Tomorrow there would be chores and small adventures. Next week Thomas's family would return to Ogden and Sarah's would visit. Life would continue its beautiful, ordinary flow. That night, lying in bed with Yates's arm around her, Zara thought about the trail of blood she had left in the snow 20 years ago. She had been dying, truly dying, and would have been dead within the hour if Yates had not found her. Her brothers had meant to erase her from the world, to silence her desire for freedom with a bullet and the killing cold. Instead, she had been found. She had been saved. And from that salvation had grown a love that had sustained her through 2 decades, through the birth of children and the building of a life, through all the joys and sorrows that came with simply being human. Yates's breathing had deepened into sleep, but Zara was still awake, still thinking. She thought about Owen and James, wondered if they had ever told themselves the truth about what they had done. She hoped they had not found peace easily, hoped guilt had shadowed their days at least a little. But mostly, she did not think about them at all. They were ghosts from a dead girl's life, and she was Zara Keller, alive and loved and free. She fell asleep smiling, safe in the arms of the man who had followed her blood trail and changed both their destinies forever. The years that followed were gentler. Yates and Zara were no longer young, but they were not ready to be old either. They split their time between the mountain cabin and the Ogden house, finding joy in both solitude and family. They were blessed with more grandchildren, 9 in total eventually, each one precious and unique. Yates taught his grandsons to track and hunt as he had taught Thomas. Zara taught her granddaughters to shoot straight and speak their minds as she had taught Sarah. They told stories of the old days, though they carefully edited the tale of how they met, leaving out the parts about betrayal and blood. When Yates was 68, he had a health scare that frightened them both. His heart had grown tired, the doctor said, worn from decades of hard living. He recovered, but more slowly than before. Zara nursed him with the same dedication he had once shown her, and Yates joked that they were even now, both having saved the other's life. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren. Thomas had arranged a party at his hotel, filling an entire ballroom with family and friends. There were speeches and toasts, and a cake so large it took 3 people to carry it. Yates and Zara danced again, more carefully now, but with the same love that had sustained them through 3 decades. 30 years, Yates murmured against Zara's hair. "Where did they go?" "Into this," Zara said, gesturing at the room full of people who existed because they had loved each other well. "Into building something that will last long after we are gone." In the spring of 1900, they returned to the mountain cabin one last time. Both knew without speaking that it would be their final visit. Yates was not strong enough anymore for the isolation, for the physical demands of mountain living, but they wanted to see it once more, to say goodbye properly. The cabin stood just as they had left it, weathered but solid. Yates had kept up repairs over the years, and it would stand for decades more. They spent a week there, walking slowly through familiar places, remembering. The meadow where Sarah had married. The grove where they had picked raspberries that first summer. The creek where Yates had taught all 3 children to fish. On their last evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was the same view they had seen thousands of times, but it never grew old. The mountains stood eternal, indifferent to human joys and sorrows, beautiful in their permanence. "I hope someone finds this place after we are gone," Zara said. "Someone who needs refuge, who needs a fresh start. Maybe this cabin can save another life like it saved mine." "It was not the cabin that saved you," Yates said. "It was us saving each other." They stayed until the stars came out, until the night grew too cold for old bones. Then they went inside, banked the fire, and closed the door on that chapter of their lives. Back in Ogden, they settled into a quieter existence. They attended church on Sundays, had dinner with Thomas's family twice a week, wrote long letters to Daniel, and received his detailed responses about his botanical discoveries. Sarah visited often with whichever daughters were not currently busy with their own young families. Yates and Zara became fixtures in their neighborhood, the elderly couple who sat on their porch in good weather, who always had candy for visiting children, who held hands when they walked to the market. People who did not know their history saw a sweet old pair who had clearly been together forever. Only family knew the dramatic story of their beginning, the blood and snow and desperate rescue that had led to this peaceful ending. On a clear morning in October 1902, Yates passed away in his sleep. His tired heart finally gave out, gently, without pain or warning. Zara woke to find him gone, and though she had known this day would come eventually, the grief was enormous. He had been her partner for 24 years, her savior and her truest friend. The world without him felt impossible to navigate, but she did navigate it, because she was Zara Keller and she had survived worse. She leaned on her children, took comfort in her grandchildren, and slowly found her footing in this new reality. She lived 4 more years, years filled with family and memories and quiet contentment. When Sarah found her mother's journals after Zara's death in 1906, she discovered the full story written in fading ink. Zara had documented everything, from her brother's betrayal to Yates finding her to the life they built together. She had written it all down, she explained in the final entry, so that future generations would know where they came from. Would know that they descended from a woman who refused to die when men wanted her dead, and from a man who chose compassion over convenience. Sarah shared the journals with her brothers, and together they decided that this story, their parents' story, should be preserved. They had copies made for each branch of the family. The tale of Yates and Zara became family legend, passed down through generations, growing more treasured with each telling. The mountain cabin stood for another 50 years before finally succumbing to weather and time. By then, Yates and Zara's great-great-grandchildren were scattered across the West, each carrying the story of their ancestors who had found each other in the wilderness. And though the cabin fell, and the people who remembered them firsthand passed away, the love story endured. It became a reminder that the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes, that kindness can change everything, that survival and love are sometimes the same thing. It became proof that family is not always defined by blood, and that home is not always where you start, but where you choose to stay. Yates had followed a blood trail and found his destiny. Zara had survived the unsurvivable and built a life of freedom and love. Together they had created something that lasted far beyond their own years, a legacy of devotion and resilience that echoed through time. Their story, born in winter's cruelty and grown in summer's abundance, became legend. And in becoming legend, it became immortal.